I gave you the koan last week. A man sits on the top of a 100-foot pole. How does he proceed? Sitting on top of the 100-foot pole is where you take your mind. When you take your mind to that point of equipoise and balance, there's nowhere left to go. The mind can only become self-aware. And this is as we start the journey back towards your own awareness, your own self-nature or your own Buddha nature. So, this is as you practice the mindfulness, we come down to this dukkha, this feeling of the disquiet, the unsatisfactoriness. And this is the reality. This is the beginning of the path. Religion works in ideologies. Now I'm trying to juxtapose the religion of ideology with the spirituality of imperfection. A religion starts with an ideology and clings to, this is the truth, this is the way things are. True spirituality starts with imperfection. I don't know how things are. I suffer. There is something that has to change. I have to learn something new. This is the spirituality of imperfection. I can give you an example. Before I ordained, in fact, many of you, when you look at ordained people, right, you have all these ideas about what it's like, what we do, who we are, the rules that we follow, and we actually find it quite amusing. Because usually you're way off. One or two people have been here and have been monks before, so you know what I'm talking about. I read a story of a monk, this is before I ordained, I read a story of a monk, and he was walking across India, and he's part of one of these groups where the monks won't touch money. And he was begging food in India, he had his bowl. He felt a little strange, being a Westerner, begging food of poor Indians. But he had his bowl, and every so often somebody would come along and try and put money in the bowl. And he was from one of these Buddhist groups, ordained Thai group systems that won't touch money. They'll still buy things and have things, but somebody else has to carry the money and pay for it. And this is actually the tradition that I started in, and I thought this was normal and right. And so he talked about being in India, and every so often people would offer him money. Now if he accepts the money, he can go and buy something to eat. If he doesn't accept the money, he might not get anything to eat. And so he was talking about this quandary, and he's saying, well, shall I accept money or not? And I thought to myself, what a rubbish monk, worthless. Because if you've got an ideal, if you're holding on to an ideology, you should be willing to fight for it, you should be willing to die for it. I've read these stories of gurus and people who've thrown themselves off a mountainside in the search for enlightenment. The Buddha had thrown himself to tigers. You've got to be willing to sacrifice your life in order to gain something that's so perfect and so holy as enlightenment. And if you're not willing to give up your life, you're not really, you're not really worthwhile. You're not a worthwhile monk. So then I came to Thailand and I ordained as a monk, and I remember very clearly, that bag is very rustly. This particular day was a rather nice day, and so I went to see, I'm going to buy you a cloth bag for next week, and I went to see my abbot because I needed my visa renewing. Okay. Now to get my visa renewing I need a car to go out and drive me around to get all my signatures from all these different monks from different temples. I need a car to take to Bangkok to deposit all my documents. Then I need another car to drive me back to Bangkok to pick up my documents, to go to the immigration. I need a layman with me to pay for the visa and buy me lunch on the way. So I went to the abbot to claim my just desserts, right? And he said, here's 2,000 baht, you get the bus. And I was feeling rather forlorn, because now I'm in this quandary, do I accept the money? And it was a nice day, I didn't really want to die. My ideals said you're really going to be willing to die for your principles, and I'm like, it's kind of nice outside, I don't want to die today. it didn't feel quite as heroic. My sacrificing myself for my ideals didn't feel quite as heroic as I thought it was going to be. So I took the money and I went and I got my visa. This is the thing. The religion always works in ideologies, and you always have this great set of beliefs and I would say fantasies. The reality of it is always very different. The reality of it is your mind's a mess, your concepts are a mess. You're going to have to empty out, you're going to have to change, you're going to have to grow, you're going to have to be willing to work with imperfection, with your own imperfection. You have to be willing to work with your own shortcomings. You have to become willing to work with your own suffering. All of these arts that I was talking about earlier, they all require a lot of practice. And practice, if you practice dance, it means you're going to have bruised toes and sprained ankles. If you're practicing Aikido, it means you're going to take knocks on the head before you get good at it. Hopefully for rock climbing you don't have too many failures. And the same is true for meditation. This is the beginning of the path. You start to see, know and understand your own imperfection. You feel your own dukkha, you feel your own suffering. And this is when you're starting to do the practice. Now, if you're new to Buddhism, the next bit might not make sense, but there are teachings in Buddhism that say you've got nothing to do, nowhere to go, you're already attained. The Mahamudra, the Dzogchen, I was with one Thai teacher, he's just so highly attained, he's on another plane altogether. And he said to me, he said, can you do that thing that you just did with your mind? You can see your mind this time. And I'm like, well, I'll try. And he said, no, you can never try. If you're trying, you're not doing it. This kind of idea that it's got to be totally effortless, there's nothing you can do to attain it. Enlightenment is already there with you. And it's actually wrong. This is the wrong teaching. This isn't the way that the Buddha taught. These people may very well know what they're talking about. They may be very highly attained. But that wasn't what the Buddha was talking about. Nisargadatta, Krishnamurti, they would all talk from this kind of viewpoint, right? That whatever you're doing, that's not it. Whatever you're developing, that's not enlightenment, etc. The Buddha taught a path. It had a beginning and an end, and he called it a magga, a path, a pathway, a way that you can travel. There are certain things that you can do. There are certain perceptions that you can change. There are certain qualities that you can develop that may not be enlightenment, but they're going to take you to enlightenment. And this is the difference between the Buddha being a teacher and many of the arahants and great sages and saints as being teachers. The Buddha could teach this mechanism, whereas many of the enlightened people, they can't. They're just like, hey man, just be enlightened. You know? That's all you need to do. You're already enlightened, don't do anything. There is a path. Now, if you take the beginning of the path and the destination of the path, the thing that lies in between is called what? And you nobody would get it. It's called story. This is what story is. This is why I'm a very big fan of storytelling. Whenever there's a start, and you always start from imperfection, and you always head towards happily ever after. So if a storyteller would say, well, all you have to do is live happily ever after. You cut the story and the imperfection out, it doesn't work, right? This is the same with the spiritual path. It starts with the imperfection, but there is a change, there is a development, there is a learning that takes you towards the goal in the end. This story will include a number of different factors. And in a couple of weeks we're going to go through one of the fairy tales, which is a very good example of this. You need the hero, he or she needs to have innocence, they need to be strong because of their innocence, they need a weapon, usually they have a sidekick, and you put all these factors together, and this is the spiritual path, this is the path of change. And sometimes it's hard, sometimes you really have to learn the hard way. Like flammable and inflammable, I learned that one the hard way. Actually mean the same thing, if you didn't get that. So, story. You're starting from this point of your own imperfection, your own suffering. Now you can't get very far in Buddhism without coming across the word suffering. So, word suffering comes from the word dukkha. Dukkha can be translated a number of different ways, but one of the ways that isn't a good translation is suffering. But that's the translation we got lumbered with, so that's the word that we kind of use. It doesn't really mean suffering. There are other words like Annie here was saying unsatisfactoriness, which is a very good definition. It's a little bit long, and it's hard if you're not a native English speaker. Thai speakers find problems with this word. Suffering is a lot easier. Stress is another one, and this is a word that is used by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who translates a lot of the suttas. He uses the word stress, which I hated. Like that, Buddhism doesn't mean you're stressed out and you're getting unstressed. That's therapy. It's not Buddhism. Right? And then actually, it was Arthur here, as our engineer. He pointed out to me that if you make a bridge and you have two pillars, and between it you have a load, and the structure of the bridge has to bear the load, and that is stress. The bridge is under stress, it's under pressure to change, it's under a load, it's under force. That is quite a nice concept of suffering, or of dukkha. You're under some kind of force, some kind of pressure that keeps you moving. You're under some kind of load. One translation for Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana is Hinayana is the lighter load, Mahayana is the heavier load. Mahayana is a heavier load because you have to save all world beings as well as yourself, so it's a bigger burden to bear. Personally, I like the lighter load, that appeals to me. Some other words, the wavering, the unsteady, the uneasy. I actually like these definitions because the definition of enlightenment is the opposite. The unwavering, the immutable, the unshakable. These are all words that the Buddha used for enlightenment. The actual meaning of the word dukkha comes from the idea of something being eccentric, not like an Englishman, but like a wheel that is not quite in balance. And if any of you have changed your car tires, one of the things they do when they change the tire on your car is they'll charge you or tell you that you have free balancing. Not many people know what balancing is, but even the modern day wheels, when they come from a manufacturer, they're not perfectly weighted, they're slightly off centre. So when you're driving down the road at 70 miles an hour, or 7 miles an hour if you're in Bangkok, the difference in your weight starts to shake, and it will literally shake your vehicle apart if there is a slight difference in the weight. So what they do when they balance your wheel is they stick these little tiny weights around your wheel to make it balance out perfectly, so that you're not being shaken. So that's the meaning of the word dukkha, literally. It means off-center. It means a wheel that isn't quite centered properly and it's shaking. It means this is our motivation going through life. We always have this dis-ease that's pushing us to more and more activity. Now, this ease is not suffering. We're not saying that you have to walk around hanging your head and, be thoroughly miserable if you want to be a Buddhist. We tend to be happy people. Monks and nuns tend to be happy people. But there is always this dis-ease behind your existence. This dis-ease then, this suffering, this dukkha is described as three kinds. Dukkha dukkata, viparinama dukkata, and sankhara dukkata. Talk about practice, I had to practice that one to get it out in one go. Dukkha dukkata is the suffering of suffering. Or unpleasant suffering. Viparinama dukkata is the suffering of change, and sankhara dukkata has a few different translations, but I'm going to present it as the suffering of mind states. In the Tibetan tradition, they usually translate it as all-pervasive suffering, the last one, but actually I think it means mind states. First one, dukkha dukkata, then, the suffering of suffering. There are two kinds, bodily and mental. Bodily suffering is the pain and the discomfort that you feel in the body. And one interesting point, even the Buddha had physical unpleasantness, physical suffering.